Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Talks in Class. Thank you so much for joining me today. My name is Jenna. I'm here to take you through another episode, another conversation. I hope everybody's had a great couple of weeks since the last time we chatted here on the podcast. Lots going on around here. First off, right off the bat, I have to tell you guys about Vegas. Because as you know, I went to Vegas. It was a couple weeks ago now for the Lovers and Friends Music Festival, which is a music festival for artists from back in my day, we'll just say. I mean, everybody from Usher to Gwen Stefani, Nelly, Backstreet Boys, Lil Wayne. Like, there were so many people. I've been really, really excited for this for months, and I planned it with one of my good friends from grad school who lives in New York, and we were going to make a little girls' weekend out of it, so we kind of got a vacation along with the music festival. So if you don't already know, we'll just cut to the chase. The music festival was canceled. And, you know, I get it. I get the reasoning for it. But it was canceled pretty last minute. And we were all together when we found out about it. As I mentioned, I was planning to go meet up with some other content creators. There were a lot of other millennial content creators who went to Vegas for this music festival. So as planned, we all got together on Friday night, which was the night before the festival, so that we could have a couple drinks, you know, meet up, chat, just hang out, and kind of, it was our own little pre-party for the event. And actually, when we were at the bar, we were at a bar in the Venetian on the Strip, and Next, the music group Next was there. Anyway, so we're there, we're having a great time. They were playing all these throwback songs, like, we were having a blast, just a little millennial party. And all of a sudden, we had only been there for maybe an hour. One of the guys that was with us, one of the other creators, comes up to me and is like, the festival was canceled. There was a chance that it was going to get canceled because of the weather, which is why it was ultimately canceled, but I legitimately thought he was kidding. And so I'm like, you're what? And he's like, no, I'm totally serious. I'm not messing with you. It was canceled. So we pull up the festival Instagram, and sure enough, there's a post that it was canceled. So we were all together at this bar, like essentially having our own little pre-party for the event, when we all found out at the same time that it was canceled. I wish that there was somebody, like a fly on the wall, recording us to get all of our reactions, because we all just kind of looked around the bar at each other and started making eye contact with each other, like in disbelief. Is this serious? Have you seen it? Is this a joke? Is it real? But it was real. It was, in fact, canceled. Ultimately, it came down to weather. There was a very severe wind alert for Vegas that weekend. And look, I get it. Wind in the desert does not play. I would not have wanted to be out there if the winds that they predicted were going to happen actually happened. It didn't ultimately end up being that bad on Saturday until much later in the evening. Sunday ended up being pretty bad, actually. My hotel closed their pool early on Saturday, and I think it was closed all day on Sunday, but anyway, you can't predict the weather. I get it. It is what it is. Of course, it was very disappointing, but we still had a really, really fun time. So the next day, Saturday, when was supposed to be the festival, we all put on our festival outfits because, I mean, I didn't pack anything else. That was my outfit for Saturday. That's all I had. So you were getting me in cargo pants and a halter top, no matter what. But we all put on our outfits and we, you know, hung out, and it was fun anyway. But man, I was so sad. I'm still sad about it. The pain has dulled a little because it's been a couple weeks, but I'm still sad about it. With that said, I will start with my what good happened, as always. And despite the festival being canceled, which was very disappointing, my what good happen is still that I got to go to Vegas. It was so much fun. I got to spend a couple of days with my friend from grad school who I haven't seen in a long time. We just lounged by the pool. It was nice. We sipped pool cocktails. It was very relaxing. And then I got to spend time with some other people. I got to hang out with some content creators that I either had never met before or had talked to a lot but hadn't actually met in real life. On Saturday night, we ended up going out. I went with another creator and her husband. It was so much fun. Regardless of the festival, it ended up being really fun. And I did kind of realize that I don't vacation a lot. I travel a lot, but I don't vacation as in a trip that exists just for leisure. So that was really nice. Highly recommend it if you can make it happen somehow, because I feel refreshed. This week's conversation is kind of a long time coming. It's one that I've had on my list for a while, and I don't know why I am just doing it now, because it's something that was a big part of my life back in the 90s and early 2000s, and is something that I honestly think about a lot. And that is the golden age of romantic comedy movies that we had in the 90s and early 2000s. If you are listening to this podcast, I'm going to guess there's a pretty good chance that you lived through the 90s, or at the very least, you're interested enough in the 90s and the 2000s, I guess, to have some familiarity with the pop culture. So to begin this conversation, I'd like everyone to take a moment to think about your favorite movies from that time period. 90s, 2000s, whatever. The movies you rented with your friends for sleepovers, the movies that you begged your parents to drive you to the movie theaters to see with your little friends before you could drive, the movies you saw on TV over and over and over. They were always rerunning on TBS or USA or TNT or E or wherever. The movies that you probably still quote to this day. And when you think about those movies, there's probably a pretty decent variety in the genres of the movies. A couple that come to mind for me are Now and Then, Empire Records. I watch both of those over and over, which I guess are both dramatic comedies, I would say, coming of age movies. Dazed and Confused is another one, which is another coming of age teen movie. But most of the movies that I remember from this time, the kind of era-defining, deep core memory movies from the 90s and early 2000s especially, would fall into the category of romantic comedies. There are those movies from my childhood that I was definitely too young to watch at the time, but I still loved them, and I remember seeing them all the time, like Pretty Woman, Father of the Bride, Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead, which I remember watching over and over and over one summer because it was on HBO a lot, and I was way too young to understand half of it. There were the rom-coms that were also kids' movies, which were so amazing. Movies like It Takes Two and The Parent Trap, which are basically the same movie, but two of my favorites from that time period. And then there are the teen movie / rom-coms, like 10 Things I Hate About You, Can't Hardly Wait, She's All That, Clueless, Drive Me Crazy. I mean, the list in that category are endless. And just the basically endless supply of mid to late 90s rom-com classics, like My Best Friend's Wedding, The Wedding Singer, You've Got Mail, There's Something About Mary, Never Been Kissed, Runaway Bride. I mean, the list could go on and on and on, especially if we're talking about the 90s. And that doesn't even touch the stone cold classics that came out in the early 2000s, okay? I am probably biased, but I really truly don't think that many people would argue with the fact that the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s gave us this golden age of rom-coms. That was the time of rom-coms. These movies were fun, simple, 90-minute movies, nothing crazy, formulaic plot. They all had, kind of superficial, definitely kind of somewhat stereotypical characters that easily fit into types. This is important in a rom-com. You've got the nerd, the jock, the prom queen, or like the successful young single girl. You have the best friend, who's usually like the comic relief in the movie. And then you have the underdog, maybe she's the quiet, underestimated girl who gets a makeover and suddenly is hot and nobody realized it before. They usually had a soundtrack full of pop music, and more often than not, a very kind of neatly wrapped, happy ending. Yes, these movies are very predictable, but they were fun, and they took you on just enough of an emotional ride to make you feel something, like you felt some emotion from this movie, but they ultimately left you feeling good when the movie was over, which is also important to a rom-com. You leave feeling happy and hopeful that maybe love is real, and you're just one meet cute away from your perfect life. You just have to go hang out in a bookstore or a coffee shop and hope that there's like some nice single gentleman there ready to meet you. And as simple and easy to replicate as they were, a lot of them were also huge hits when I was a kid. I feel like there was a new rom-com hitting theaters like every month when I was a kid, and a lot of them did relatively well. I mean, people went to see them. And these were standalone little movies. They weren't installments in a franchise. They didn't have these insane budgets. They weren't full of like, elaborate CGI action scenes. They were pretty simple. Thinking about it now, it does seem kind of quaint, especially compared to what we are used to in movies, theatrical movies now. But it was a different time, okay? It was the 90s. And entertainment was very, very different. Movies then were about movie stars. The actual movies, in a lot of cases, were kind of secondary to the actors in the movies. The movies were kind of about the movie stars. People went to the movies because they recognized the movie stars. And often those stars kind of told us the type of movie we were going to see. Like in the 90s, if someone said, let's go see the new Adam Sandler movie, you knew exactly what you were getting. Obviously, it was a different plot slightly and a different character, but you knew it was a comedy. You also knew what type of comedy it was going to be. You knew who the supporting cast would be because it was always the same people in those movies. You knew how the movie would make you feel. That's the important part. Same thing if somebody said, let's go see the new Will Ferrell movie in the 2000s. Like, you knew what that movie was going to be. You knew that you were going to be quoting that movie for the next 6 to 12 months, literally nonstop. And if somebody said there is a new Julia Roberts movie in the 90s, like, you could pretty well guess that it was going to be a rom-com. You knew what you were getting. So I feel like we used the stars as shorthand for the type of movie, but also the stars really did drive attendance. If you liked a certain celebrity, a certain movie star, you would go see their movies. Tom Cruise on a poster would sell movie tickets. Like, Robin Williams' name associated with a movie would sell tickets in and of itself in the 90s. And even movies that weren't very good, this worked really well. You could just like put a really big star in the movie, and even if it sucked, it would do pretty well. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but I'm looking at you, Crossroads starring Britney Spears. Like, the movies would sell a lot of tickets because of the star, not necessarily because of the content in the movie. And that's just not really the case anymore. Now it's about the property or the franchise or whatever the recognizable thing is about the movie and not about the star. These, studios don't want to take chances on original content that might not draw crowds. Like, a little independent movie is not a guaranteed thing, especially if they're paying for a huge star to be in it. So they just reboot stuff and remake stuff that people already know that has done well in the past because those are proven concepts. They assume that they're going to draw a crowd. And I don't know, that just doesn't bode well for rom-coms. Like, unless someone's going to create the Meg Ryan extended universe or something, that actually would be so funny. Somebody needs to do this, like create rom-com extended universes with characters from different movies and like bring them all together, and you could make a bunch of different movies, like endless sequels. Maybe an early 2000s New York City rom-com universe where Andy Anderson from Composure Magazine is frustrated over her latest how-to column. So she decides to go get a drink after work at a New York dive bar called Coyote Ugly, where she meets a very interesting female lawyer who's visiting from Boston and wears all pink and has a chihuahua in her purse named Bruiser. Or maybe a 90s Los Angeles rom-com extended universe where Cher Horowitz runs into Taylor Vaughn while out dress shopping, and then all of a sudden Vivian from Pretty Woman pops her head out of the dressing room and scolds the sales lady for not helping them, not being attentive enough to them. And then it pans back and we find out that they're actually shopping in Romy and Michelle's store. And Janine Garofalo's there smoking her quick burning cigarette. I actually would watch that. Or like a better, more thought out version of it. But anyway, the days of simple, fun, unserious, original movies do kind of feel like they died in the very early 2010s. Like, to me, I think Pitch Perfect, This Is 40, like that kind of era around 2012 or so feels like the last time that I really remember rom-com type movies being big hits in movie theaters. But that could also just because I'm getting old. But obviously, there is this massive shift. There has been this massive shift in how we consume content. And this rise in social media has also really impacted this in a really big way. there are original movies being made today. They're just not going to theaters. They're going directly to streaming services where if they don't take off immediately and generate some sort of buzz with viewers where they're on like the top 10 list or people are talking about them on social media, they just get kind of thrown into the pit of endless content and very quickly forgotten or, in a lot of cases are not even known by a lot of people. And that's a huge difference too. Obviously, when I was a kid, we just had fewer options. We didn't have this endless array of content to choose from. First of all, we did not have social media to turn to for entertainment. Between YouTube and TikTok, social media is probably by far the biggest source of entertainment content consumed by young people. It's not movies. It's not even television. It's their phones, it's YouTube. It's their For You page. It's a lot of hyper-specific, down-to-the-minute, current, curated content. And that's really hard to compete with if you're a movie studio. I mean, competing with those highly personalized algorithms is really, really difficult. In my day, our social media was the AOL homepage and the WB.com Dawson's Creek chat room. It was not the same thing. And obviously we didn't have streaming either. We had physical media, which in itself is limited by the space and the money that you could spend on the media. We maybe had cable. If you were really, really lucky, you had HBO, or maybe one of your friends had HBO or Showtime or some other premium channel that showed newer movies that were unedited and also didn't have commercial breaks every 5 minutes. Entertainment in a lot of ways was something that we had to seek out. Like really a lot of entertainment required us to get up and leave the house. We had to go somewhere to rent a movie. We had to go somewhere to buy a magazine so that we could see what was going on with our favorite celebrities or whatever. We had to go somewhere to watch a new release movie. We couldn't stream it at home. We had to go to the theater. Sometimes we even had to go somewhere just to talk to our friends. Like if your mom was on the phone or your sibling was on the internet and you needed to talk to your friend, you had two options. Either you could wait for everybody to be done so it was your turn to tie up the phone line, or you could hop on your bike and ride over to your friend's house, knock on the door, and talk to them face to face. And obviously we also didn't have access to this endless, highly personalized content via algorithms on the internet that we have now, where everything is precisely curated for us based on our preferences, our viewing history. So when a new movie came out, as long as it was like somewhat interesting to us, if it had a star that you liked, or it was just in a general genre that you thought you would like it was a kid's movie, it was a teen movie, it was a rom-com, whatever, you went because there just wasn't really that much else to do. We had limited options. And also, I think this is important too, and a really big difference. If you didn't like every single tiny detail about that movie, that was okay. Not everything was made for us and curated for us. And of course, obviously, it's still not made for us, but we didn't know any different back then. So it was more generally accepted to have experiences that maybe didn't fit your own specific preferences 100% of the time. But we also went because movie tickets were like, I don't know, $5 in the late 90s. Like entertainment was still relatively accessible for normal people. Unlike now when it feels like you can either stay home and watch stuff on your phone or maybe on streaming, or you can choose to go out and maybe go do some activity that seems relatively normal until you just like set foot outside and breathe the air, and then all of a sudden everything costs $100. Like everything is so expensive now. Even simple stuff that we used to do all the time as kids, like bowling or mini golf or, going to a movie. It's expensive, especially if you're trying to take a family. And the more we stay home, the more expensive literally everything outside gets. And it's just like this cycle. But back when I could see a matinee at the Mall of America movie theater for $5, which I know this specifically, I know the Mall of America movie theater was $5 for a matinee because I recently found a bunch of my old movie tickets from the late 90s and the early 2000s, which obviously have the prices on them, including my tickets for Superstar, remember that movie? The Molly Shannon movie, and Save the Last Dance, which were both $5. But back then, my friends and I saw movies all the time. You know, people went to the movies. It was just a thing that people do. All kinds of people, not just people who were super fans of a certain franchise or people who felt like they needed to go see some movie out of some sort of loyalty to, you know, the story or the brand, which is kind of what it's become now. And the result was that, like streaming now, studios churned out a ton of movies. And yeah, some of them did become our modern classics of any genre, whether we're talking about rom-coms or dramas, comedies, whatever. There were obviously very good movies that came out, but also a lot of them were really bad. Like, not unlike streaming now, you did have to wade through some crap to find the good stuff, but you had to do it in the movie theater. For every 10 things I hate about you I saw in the 90s, I probably saw at least a handful of really, really bad, very forgettable movies also. So it wasn't all, you know, great rom-coms. And it does make sense that as audiences go to the movies less and less, the studios will focus on the projects that are most likely to be successful, and the rest of it kind of just gets dumped on streaming. Which, unfortunately, for those of us who grew up in the golden age of rom-coms, has led to a tragic, just absolutely tragic lack of romantic comedies in the past decade or so. When most people think of the golden age or the modern peak of romantic comedies, it's probably the 90s that first comes to mind. I feel like that's what I hear people talk about most often. The 90s were when the formula had been really streamlined, but it was still new enough for that classic rom-com structure to work. People weren't sick of it yet. The 90s rom-coms were relatively straightforward. They didn't have a whole lot of like gimmicky stuff added to the plot yet. But we really can't talk about rom-coms without at least mentioning the 80s. If the 90s perfected the rom-com formula, the 80s proved its potential for commercial success. Those John Hughes classics of the 80s laid the foundation for some of my favorite teen kind of coming of age rom-coms of all time that mostly came out in like the late 90s, early 2000s. Movies like 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, even The Breakfast Club, which obviously the romance aspect there is a lot less important than the general teen angst aspect, but those movies from the 80s proved that there was an audience, a really big audience for teen-focused movies, movies about teenagers being teenagers, but especially about their romantic endeavors and like their romantic relationships. And thank God for that, because the teen-focused rom-coms, they're some of my absolute favorites of the 90s and the early 2000s. There were so many good ones. Movies like Can't Hardly Wait, She's All That, Never Been Kissed, even American Pie, like all those high school movies, whether it was a straight up rom-com or a little bit more of a party rom-com, they all had sort of that romantic element, but they were about teenagers being teenagers. But for me, my personal golden age of rom-coms is this sweet spot from about 1999 to 2005, maybe 2006. And this probably has as much to do with my age at the time than the actual quality of the movies at the time. In 1999, I was 12, so it was the perfect age to latch on to the rom-com genre. And then I graduated high school in 2005. So that's kind of the period. But honestly, the classics just stacked up during that time. Off the top of my head, a few that I can think of that were amazing: Legally Blonde, Sweet Home Alabama, I loved Reese, what can I say? How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days, She's the Man with Amanda Bynes, The Devil Wears Prada, 13 Going on 30, classics. Just Married with Brittany Murphy and Ashton Kutcher. I love Brittany Murphy. I always thought she was really funny. The Sweetest Thing with Cameron Diaz, Selma Blair, and Christina Applegate. So funny. Bridget Jones's Diary, another classic. Mean Girls, not exactly a rom-com, but definitely has some elements. A Cinderella Story, Coyote Ugly, Freaky Friday, Center Stage, Bring It On, Save the Last Dance, The Freaking Holiday. I mean, the list goes on and on. There were so many. And just like the 90s rom-coms that starred Meg Ryan or Julia Roberts, the 2000s rom-coms also had their go-to gals. The 2000s rom-com leading ladies: Cameron Diaz, Reese Witherspoon, Anne Hathaway, Kate Hudson, I feel like was in a lot of rom-coms in the 2000s. Also J-Lo. Let's not forget about all the kind of terrible rom-coms that J-Lo has made. I actually Googled this. There are so many. I was kind of shocked. Oh my God. Okay, so we have The Wedding Planner, Made in Manhattan. I saw both of those in theaters, which is mildly embarrassing. The notorious 2003 film Gigli, another Bennifer film, Jersey Girl, Shall We Dance with Richard Gere. I didn't even know that existed. It's from 2004. I don't know how I missed that. I literally never heard of it. Monster in Law with Jane Fonda. And then a little later, she did a movie called The Backup Plan. That was in 2010. And then What to Expect When You're Expecting. I think that was 2012. Totally forgot about that. And then just recently in 2022, she did that movie Marry Me with Owen Wilson, which I kind of forgot about, but I do definitely remember seeing a lot of advertisement for that movie. I wonder how that did. I actually don't know. But the fact that Jennifer Lopez was in 7 rom-coms in the 2000s alone, 7, just goes to show how wildly popular this formula was, this rom-com formula was. The 2000s also saw an expansion kind of the genre into these like other iterations of rom-coms, especially these sort of gimmicky situation rom-coms, movies that put the characters in increasingly more ridiculous situations in order to just, I guess, add uniqueness to the plot because it was so formulaic. Movies like What Happens in Vegas from 2008, where Cameron Diaz and Ashton Kutcher are strangers who get married in Vegas, but then they actually fall in love. There's 50 First Dates from 2004, which I love, but is actually very ridiculous. Drew Barrymore plays a girl who doesn't have a short-term memory. She can't remember anything day to day. So Adam Sandler falls in love with her and has to figure out how to get her to fall in love with him because she doesn't remember him every single day when she wakes up. But obviously he succeeds and they fall in love. Knocked Up from 2007, an absolute classic, obviously about a one-night stand between an uptight television commentator and an unemployed, like, stoner dude that results in a pregnancy, but then eventually they fall in love. The Proposal from 2009, one of my favorites ever. Honestly, I will watch that movie every single time it's on television. But I mean, come on. The plot of the movie is that Ryan Reynolds has to marry his boss, who is evil and everybody hates her, so that she doesn't get deported to Canada. But then you guessed it, they fall in love for real and get married again so that she can stay in the country. Like, it's absurd when you think about it. Absurd. And there were so many movies like this. And these ridiculous movies combined with like the tropes of rom-coms was kind of the bread and butter of the 2000s. I feel like there were a ton of movies also about like friends who fall in love, the friends to lovers thing, like the classic Just Friends, which is a Christmas movie from 2005, but also one of the very best movies of the 2000s, full stop. I will stand by that statement as long as I live. Anna Faris, Ryan Reynolds, hilarious, amazing. Also a lot of friends with benefit type situations where the characters obviously do fall in love, including the movies No Strings Attached and the movie that's literally just called Friends with Benefits, which were both made in 2011. This is so bizarre to me. They seem like the exact same movie and they both came out the same year. They're not the same movie. One of them has Ashton Kutcher and Natalie Portman. That's No Strings Attached. And then the other one has Mila Kunis and Justin Timberlake. So that's Friends with Benefits. 2 of the exact same movies, same year. Whatever. The 2000s also gave us the rise of quirky rom-coms or more indie type rom-coms, which I feel like really started with Garden State, which everybody, or I guess all the indie kids loved. But then we had movies like Juno, Scott Pilgrim versus the World, Adventureland. Do you remember that one? Basically anything with Michael Cera or Jesse Eisenberg kind of fell into this category. There were movies about quirky young people, maybe like slightly outcasted young people who find themselves coming together, connected through whatever the scenario is in the movie. Even the movie Saved from 2004, which I think is one of the funniest movies I've ever seen with Jenna Malone and Mandy Moore and Macaulay Culkin, would kind of fit into that indie rom-com category, although it's definitely a satire. That's its primary category, I think. It's not a straight rom-com, but it does, I think, fit. And that was always a subgenre that I personally really enjoyed. And again, it just goes to show how popular the rom-com formula was, that it reached all of these different audiences through these kind of different iterations of basically the exact same plot of a movie throughout the 90s and the 2000s. And sadly, we have yet to see a true rom-com renaissance with all of the things from the 90s and 2000s that are coming back. We really haven't seen that comeback of the rom-com, although I do feel like we're maybe possibly on the verge of one. That movie, Anybody But You with Sydney Sweeney, which I think came out just earlier this year, actually did pretty well. I saw it, I thought it was funny, and I think it shows that people are craving original content, for one. Even if it does follow a very familiar formula, they don't necessarily want another sequel. But also in this post-pandemic recession, election year, 24-hour news cycle kind of like stressful world that we're living in, people just want things that make them feel good. I don't think it's rocket science, right? They want some escapism, they want to laugh. And a rom-com gives us all those things, but it's also very low stakes. There are emotional aspects to it, obviously, that's part of the point of the movie, but we know, because we understand the formula, that there will be a happy ending, so those emotions are safe. So I don't know, I do have hopes that maybe we can get some new original comedies and rom-coms. I will definitely go see them in the theater. I will pay for the movie ticket if we do. And until then, we always have our classic favorites that we can rewatch over and over. Or you could dig deep into the archives for some less than classics, which brings me to today's list. 5 rom-coms that you might have forgotten even existed from the early 2000s. Number 5 is Win a Date with Tad Hamilton. This is a 2004 rom-com starring Kate Bosworth, who I love, Topher Grace, and Josh Duhamel, about essentially a love triangle between a girl and her friend, so kind of classic friends to lovers rom-com trope, and a celebrity who she wins a date with through a contest. The movie made $21.3 million with a $22 million budget, so it was not exactly a success, but it was 3rd at the box office on its opening weekend in early 2004, so we'll give it that. Number 4 is Just Like Heaven from 2005. I'm actually horrified that I don't have much of a memory of this movie at all, considering it's a Reese Witherspoon movie, and I do really love some Reese, especially a Reese rom-com, but it's about a man who moves into an apartment that's haunted by a ghost who doesn't believe that she's really dead, and then he falls in love with her, as in the ghost. He falls in love with the ghost, but then it turns out that she's just in a coma, like she's not actually dead. I don't know. I can't explain this one. I haven't actually seen it. As terrible as this story really does sound, this one made over $100 million, and it's also based on a book, so it's probably not as terrible as this summary made it sound. Number 3 is Good Luck Chuck from 2007. Yikes. This one is like a deeply buried memory that just came flooding back as soon as I read the name Dane Cook. If you don't have the memory buried somewhere deep, Good Luck Chuck was a rom-com starring Jessica Alba, and yes, Dane Cook. Remember when Dane Cook was super famous for like 5 minutes and everybody was talking about him endlessly? What a weird time. Basically, this movie is about a man who becomes known for being kind of like a dating good luck charm because every woman who dates him ends up finding the one, quote unquote, the one, right after they break up with him. So obviously he must find a way to get a woman to actually stay with him instead of breaking up with him in order to find their true love, which of course is where Jessica Alba's character comes in. I love Jessica Alba, but woof. Number 2 is The Ugly Truth. I distinctly remember going to see this movie in the movie theater in 2009, but I don't remember very much about the movie itself. This movie is Katherine Heigl, hot off of Knocked Up, which was a huge success in 2007, and Gerard Butler, who obviously was in 300. I don't know, I'm sure he was in other things. That's what comes to mind though. This is a classic enemies to lovers, opposites attract rom-com trope where Katherine Heigl's uptight, kind of control-freak, hopeless romantic character falls for a man that she previously thought was disgusting and juvenile, which sounds a lot like Knocked Up, actually, and also pretty much every other adult movie character Katherine Heigl has ever played. And number 1, From Justin to Kelly from 2003. Okay, not only is this a rom-com starring 2 American Idol alums from the early 2000s, it's a musical. I mean, obviously, they were on American Idol, that's why they're famous. It's a musical, they sing. They burst into song in the middle of the movie. I did Google a few clips of this movie while prepping this podcast. I haven't actually seen it, and now I can see why I haven't actually seen it. It is horrifically cringe, but also gloriously 2003. I mean, everything about it, the outfits, the way that it looks, so 2003. I'm not even gonna waste time talking about the plot because it really doesn't matter. This movie has 1 star on IMDb. Its budget was $12 million and it made $4.9 million. That's bad. For comparison, The Room, which is pretty widely considered to be the worst movie ever made, also from 2003, also made $4.9 million. So Kelly Clarkson has certainly come a long way, but we will never forget, even though we'd probably really like to. So I don't know about you guys, I have a long list of movies to go watch now. I hope you enjoyed this episode. This was a fun conversation as always. If you did enjoy it, it's always a huge help for me if you share the podcast with somebody who might also enjoy it. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. I will see you on the next one. Bye!